Hello Year 10. Today's lesson is the first of 4 on the reading section of English Language Paper 1, the fiction paper. I'm Miss Crump and I'm really pleased to be teaching you today. I will be reminding you of the different types of questions, practicing some skills with you and giving you some tips for how to get the best marks in this exam. Finally, you'll be given time to write up your answers ready to submit to your teacher next week. And we're really looking forward to seeing what you've learnt. For today's lesson, you will need your workbook and a pen, and if you have them, some coloured highlighters would also be useful. You also need to mute your social media notifications so you can really concentrate. If you need to, press pause while you get yourself organised, and when you're ready, press play to move on. I'd now like you to work through your do now. It's retrieval practice, so don't forget it only helps the information sink in if you try to do it without looking back at your notes. Press pause, answer as much as you can, and then when you're ready, press play to move on. The 4 questions in this section are list 4 things, language analysis, structure analysis and evaluation. We're going to be looking at the first 2 today. For question 2, you're going to be assessed on how well you can comment on the effects of details in the language, use a range of quotations and use terminology. The mnemonic was PM SOAPs, and hopefully you've remembered the terms it stands for. We'll need some of them today. And finally, hopefully you remembered verb, adjective and adverb. The others were tricky. Determiners are words like the and a. Prepositions would be under or beside. A conjunction would be and or because. And a pronoun would be he or us. Don't forget these word classes count as terminology so you can use them in the language section of your exam. Today we're going to be focusing on questions 1 and 2 and our objectives are: number 1, to practice strategies to help you read the text in the exam, and that includes making predictions. Number 2, select relevant information for question 1. And number 3, identify and comment on the effects of language for question 2. In the exam, you can often predict quite a lot about the text by reading the introduction and the questions. Spend a few moments now reading through this information and recording your predictions in the thought bubble. Press pause to complete the activity and then press play when you're ready to move on. Reading through this, I would be making a mental note that the text is set in 1938, which is more than 80 years ago, and it's in Brighton on a bank holiday, so I would expect there to be crowds. I'm interested in the idea that the main character, Hale, is working for a newspaper and pretending to be someone called Collie Kibber, but I'm not sure I fully understand why, so I'll be looking out for the answer to that question in the text. I'm also intrigued by what the something else on his mind might be. For question 2, I'm going to be looking out for how Brighton is described. The last question tells me that Hale might be nervous about something and hints that there might be some connections between the beginning and the end of the text. With these things in mind, it's time for you to read the text. Press pause, take your time reading, and press play when you're ready to move on. It is 1938 in the popular seaside resort of Brighton on a bank holiday. Hale, playing the part of Collie Kibber, works for the Daily Messenger newspaper, giving out cards for prizes to the holiday crowd. But he has something else on his mind. Hale knew, before he had been in Brighton 3 hours, that they meant to murder him. With his inky fingers and his bitter nails, his manner cynical and nervous, anybody could tell he didn't belong to the early summer sun, the cool Whitsun wind off the sea, the holiday crowd. They came in by train from Victoria every 5 minutes, rocked down Queen's Road, standing on the tops of the little local trams, stepped off in bewildered multitudes into fresh and glittering air. The new silver paint sparkled on the piers. The cream houses ran away into the west like a pale Victorian watercolour. A race in miniature motors, a band playing, flower gardens in bloom below the front, an aeroplane advertising something for the health in pale vanishing clouds across the sky. It had seemed quite easy to Hale to be lost in Brighton. 50,000 people besides himself were down for the day, and for quite a while he gave himself up to the good day, drinking gins and tonics wherever his programme allowed. But he had to stick closely to a programme. From 10 till 11, Queen's Road and Castle Square. From 11 till 12, the Aquarium and Palace Pier. 12 till 1, the front between the Old Ship and West Pier. Back for lunch between 1 and 2 in any restaurant he chose around the Castle Square. And after that he had to make his way down the parade to West Pier and then to the station by the Hove Streets. Advertised on every messenger poster, Collie Kibber in Brighton today. In his pocket he had a packet of cards to distribute in hidden places along his route. Those who found them would receive 10 shillings from the messenger, but the big prize was reserved for whoever challenged Hale in the proper form of words and with a copy of the messenger in his hand. "You are Mr. Collie Kibber. I claim the Daily Messenger prize." This was Hale's job, to keep doing his duty until a challenger released him, in every seaside town in turn. Yesterday Southend, today Brighton, tomorrow. He drank his gin and tonic hastily as the clock struck 11 and moved out of Castle Square. Collie Kibber always played fair, always wore the same kind of hat as in the photograph in the messenger, was always on time. Yesterday in Southend he had been unchallenged. The paper liked to save its guineas occasionally, but not too often. It was his duty today to be spotted, and it was his inclination too. There were reasons why he didn't feel too safe in Brighton, even in a Whitsun crowd. He leant against the rail near the Palace Pier and showed his face to the crowd as it uncoiled endlessly past him, like a twisted piece of wire, 2 by 2, each with an air of sober and determined gaiety. They had stood all the way from Victoria in crowded carriages. They would have to wait in queues for lunch. At midnight, half asleep, they would rock back in trains an hour late to the cramped streets and the closed pubs and the weary walk home. With immense labour and immense patience, they extricated from the long day the grain of pleasure. This sun, this music, the rattle of the miniature cars, the ghost train driving between the grinning skeletons under the Aquarium promenade, the sticks of Brighton rock, the paper sailors' caps. Nobody paid any attention to Hale. No one seemed to be carrying a messenger. He deposited one of his cards carefully on top of a little basket and moved on, with his bitten nails and his inky fingers, alone. For question 1 in the exam, you must make sure that you only select the information relevant to the question. In this case, it must be information about Hale. Press pause, complete activity 3, and then press play to move on. Any 4 of the following answers would be correct. He knew he was going to be murdered. He is in Brighton. He has inky fingers. He has bitten nails. He has a cynical manner. If you're not sure about any of your answers, you can ask your teacher in the comments section on Show My Homework. Click pause to mark your answers and press play when you're ready to move on. Now let's take a look at question 2. For a high mark in question 2, you're being asked to analyse how language has been used. Analyse means to break down something into tiny pieces, examine those pieces in detail, and then look at how they all work together to achieve a final effect. The mark scheme assesses you on 3 skills: how well you can comment on the effects of details in the language, how well you can use a range of quotations, and how well you can use terminology. So in this question 2, we're being asked to look at how the language works to create an impression of Brighton. The question says, look in detail at lines 4 to 11 of the source. How does the writer use language here to describe Brighton on that day? You could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. To make sure you answer it well, you need to do your thinking in the right order. First, you need to use your skills to identify what overall impression of Brighton is being created. Some vocabulary has been suggested here for you, but you may have other ideas. Then you need to select the details in the language that have helped to create that impression. Use your highlighters here if you have them. Press pause, complete activity 4A, and then press play to move on. When I read this, I got the impression that Brighton was almost like a mecca for tourists looking for a short escape from the humdrum reality of their daily lives. It seems glamorous and dreamlike. I've picked out several quotations that create this impression. The adjectives glittering, new and silver, and the verb sparkled all suggest something glamorous, even precious. Could glittering air be almost heavenly? The simile, like a pale Victorian watercolour, suggests a dreamlike, traditional, but ultimately unreal setting. And the writing from the aeroplane, in pale vanishing clouds, is a reminder of the temporary, unsubstantial nature of the holiday weekend. Paradise, but only for a day. I'll talk about bewildered multitudes on the next slide. If you missed any of these, press pause and add to your annotations before you move on. The best answers always explore several different aspects of a quotation. In the example, I've analysed the effects of the quotation bewildered multitudes in 3 ways. The adjective bewildered suggests that the day trippers are confused and overwhelmed by the experience, that it is not entirely pleasant. The noun multitudes shows that the city is very crowded, but it also has biblical connotations, which helps create the impression that the bank holiday trip is almost like a religious pilgrimage for those in search of something beyond their ordinary lives. For activity 4B, I'd like you to choose a different quotation and annotate it in a similar way with at least 2 different effects. Press pause, complete the activity, and press play when you're ready to move on. We're now going to look at some examples of analytical paragraphs from student answers. They're both good answers and meet all of the criteria in the skills checklist. For activity 5, I'd like you to read through the paragraph and annotate where they meet the different skills on the checklist, and then identify exactly what makes the level 4 answer better. You could use your different colour pens for this. Press pause, complete activity 5, and press play when you're ready to move on. Hopefully you've been able to see that whilst the level 3 answer meets all of the criteria, the level 4 answer explores interpretations and effects in more detail, using phrases like perhaps suggesting, as well as considering the deeper religious connotations of some of the vocabulary with terms like biblical and pilgrimage. It also brings points together to look at the overall impression or the cumulative effect created. Keep those points in mind as you move on to the final activity. For your final task today, I'd like you to use your notes from the activity 4B to write your own paragraph of analysis. Make it as detailed as you can, as you will be able to use what you write today in your assessment next week. Good luck with the task. We're all looking forward to seeing your work in your assessment. Goodbye.